guys, session 10. We've gone through 9, and this is 10. There was a very good suggestion made by someone that we start all of our sessions by pledging allegiance. It's not a joke, Jacob.
No, that would be.
I'm laughing because I love the idea.
So everybody please stand. Where's the flag? There's a flag here, flag over there, whatever. Come on. Ready, Jacob? You want to go?
I'll start. Of course I do. Sing it every morning.
All right.
Ready, gentlemen? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Here, here.
Yeah. Good suggestion. Yes.
So, guys, the majority of what we're going to talk about today is the Battle of Trenton, the crossing of the Delaware, and the Battle of Trenton. I'm going to take 2 or 3 minutes, just again, to try to chronologically take us where we're. There's Vinny, causing trouble. Vinny, turn around.
Then you want to go to the principal's office?
So, because there are some new people here, so you don't, I'm just trying to lead up. It's very important as we go through this that everybody remembers the chronology of events. So we started early on talking about the events leading up to the war, the Stamp Act, well, French and Indian War, then the Stamp Act, and the Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party, and so forth, leading to Lexington and Concord, which happened 251 years ago yesterday. So we're 251 years ago today. Boston, the Brits were barely making it back to Boston, going through Battle Road for the end of the 19th and into the early morning of April 20th. We laid siege around Boston, then you had Bunker Hill, you had the siege of Boston, you had King George declare everyone rebels. Henry Knox is dispatched, we're in late 1775, Henry Knox is dispatched at Fort Ticonderoga. He comes back in January, allowing Washington, while up on Dorchester Heights, to force the evacuation of the British out of Boston on March 17th, evacuation day. Within a month, it was 2 or 3 weeks, I believe, maybe 17 days come to mind. They didn't stay in Boston that long. They took off, and Washington predicted correctly that the British would be back and that they would go to New York, because New York was pivotal. It would separate the colonies and so forth if they took New York. We talked then about the Battle of Long Island. That was the last session, right, Rick? And how we miraculously escaped from Brooklyn. There's a gap of 3 or 4 months after that leads to what Jacob's going to be talking about. So the night withdrawal from Brooklyn was the night of August 29th, 1776. At that point, we were in New York City proper, Manhattan today. The British landed at Kips Bay on September 15th, 1776, 2 weeks later. Kips Bay is modern day between 34th and 38th Streets on the East River, on the east side of New York City. So if you think about 42nd Street, Broadway, and all that, it's a little bit lower, 34th to 38th. They landed at Kips Bay, and Washington narrowly avoids capture as his lines collapse. The next day, the Battle of Harlem Heights. We had retreated north to Harlem Heights. It was a high ground at the time. The British troops under William Howe pursued them. sending light infantry forward. The fighting began as a skirmish. American riflemen encountered British advanced units. Something I learned researching this, the British troops used bugle calls, which was done specifically, the writings afterwards by the British soldiers, were that they used bugle calls to reportedly taunt the Americans. They knew they had us on the run. Continental soldiers are very angry at this. Washington organized a coordinated counterattack. The British were actually driven back after several hours of fighting. Not many casualties compared to other battles, but the Americans held the field, which was a very symbolic win. That was September 16th. A month and a half later, October 28th, Washington's army found their way into Westchester County in White Plains, and the Battle of White Plains took place. Washington retreated again, preserving his army despite losing ground. A couple of weeks after that, we were at Fort Washington, our entire army. Fort Washington was located at the very northern tip of New York City, guarding the Hudson River. British and Hessian forces under Howe launched a coordinated attack from several directions. The American commander was Robert Magaw, M-A-G-A-W. We were surrounded and outmatched. We surrendered the fort. This is at Fort Washington, November 16th. Around 3,000 troops were captured. It's an amazing number. That was about 25% of our entire Continental Army was captured. Many prisoners suffered terribly. There were floating prisons in the harbor. More Americans are believed to have died in British captivity in New York than in many major battles combined. Washington was watching from across the river where Fort Lee was. Nathaniel Greene, who was the guy that basically convinced Washington to try to hold Fort Washington, because there was a question whether or not they should just avoid doing that and get out of there. Nathaniel Greene argued that they should try to hold the fort. He was not there when it was overtaken. After that, there was a fall of Fort Lee. Washington begins a desperate retreat across New Jersey. This is November 20th. Late November, early December, we're continuing withdrawing. We're running like rabbits through towns like Newark, New Brunswick, and Princeton. Our army is shrinking due to expiring enlistments, desertion, low morale. British forces are shadowing our retreat, but they failed to deliver a decisive blow. In early December of 1776, Washington crosses the Delaware the other way from New Jersey to Pennsylvania. And he orders all the boats secured to prevent the British from getting over after him. So he orders all boats secured, buying time to regroup. That is where we are going to show a video now. So they're now encamping early December. Crossing into Delaware, as you know, was on Christmas. A few weeks later, a lot happened during that time.
Alright guys, so I'm picking up right where we left off in the video, which was Christmas night, 1776, okay? Now, it's important to mention, they mentioned it in the video, but I'm just going to remind you guys, the enlistment contracts were up on January 1st of the next year. And this is, again, right after we had multiple losses, the biggest in Long Island. So our troops are demoralized, and it didn't look like they were going to re-enlist. So this is crucial for America to win, for George Washington to win, to keep his army together. So that's what we're going to pick up. Real quick, just some context. Okay, the battle name, Battle of Trenton, we know that. Date, December 25th, 1776, Trenton, New Jersey, Continental Army, and this battle revived the American cause at a moment when revolution was about to collapse. Okay? First, I'm going to go through who was there, because it can get a little confusing. Obviously, George Washington was there. He was the leader, and his job was to rush north, Trenton north. Okay? He was going to come around and go from the top north, while his Major General Nathaniel Greene and Sullivan were going to attack south. Sullivan, in particular, was in charge of blocking the bridge. Do you remember, Clem, do you remember the name of the bridge? I think it's called the Assunpink Bridge or Assunpunk Bridge. Yep, that's on the border of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. It was a way out for the Hessians that Sullivan ended up blocking. Okay, who else was there? We've heard this name before. It's a man named Colonel Henry Knox. Okay, and Colonel Henry Knox, his job was to move the artillery across the Delaware River. So we've all seen the painting of the crossing of Trenton, right? The crossing of the Delaware Trenton. The painting of George Washington standing big and tall on the boat, the flag waving. It's a great picture. It's not totally accurate though, okay? There was about 30 to 50 boats that actually crossed during this crossing of the Delaware. So it wasn't just one boat with George Washington on it. Washington was on one boat, Henry Knox and his men were carrying cannons on others, Nathaniel Greene was on another, and the whole reason was to divide and separate Trenton into 3 different columns. 2 more people that I'm going to mention, one group actually, is called the Marblehead Mariners. Has anybody ever heard of the Marblehead Mariners? I know some of us have. John Glover, exactly, John Glover and the Marblehead Mariners. The Marblehead Mariners were seamen from Marblehead, Massachusetts. Many were fishermen and sailors accustomed to rough seas and difficult navigation. Guys, remember, this is December 25th in the Northeast. It's icy, it's cold, it's not easy to move across water or any terrain for that matter, but these Marblehead Mariners knew what they were doing. Okay, they were seasoned fishermen and sailors, and they really helped us get across the Delaware. Okay? One more interesting fact about who was there. Have we heard of the name James Monroe? He went on to be a U.S. president. James Monroe was just a soldier. He was part of the Continental Army. And he was there at the crossing of the Delaware, Battle of Trenton. Matter of fact, he got shot and wounded. He ended up surviving, but he was there. We also have George Washington's little cousin. His name was Captain William Washington. And again, we had Pennsylvania militias to the south of Trenton in Pennsylvania trying to cut off different routes and flanks. They also helped. Okay, let's talk about the Hessian forces a little bit. They mentioned the main gentleman's name in the video right behind me here, but the main guy who was the Hessian leader was named Colonel Johann Rau, or sometimes John Rau they call him, and his regiment was called the Rau Regiment. There was also the Lossberg Regiment, and I can't really pronounce this, but it's Knifeisen Regiment, I believe it's called. Again, these are German names, not too accustomed to these. These are not English troops, these were German Hessians hired by the British. We talked about the Hessians a couple times. They were mercenaries, they were guns for hire, and they were really, really lethal and dangerous. So, let's talk about the force strength of each side. Okay, the American force strength. About 2,400 troops crossed with Washington and took part in the main attack. This is what's devastating about this, though. So, obviously, we know that we won this battle, surprisingly, but 3,000 troops, so more than 2,400 made the trip, but 3,000 did not make the trip. So more soldiers didn't cross the Delaware than did, which is insane to think about. Okay, it was due to weather, and some of the artillery was too heavy, and it sunk the boats or broke the boats. And the total forces supposed to cross was 5,000, but only 2,400 actually made the trip. So now I have a little graph in front of me. I'm just going to break down the artillery and what we used. So the artillery commander, of course we talked about, was Henry Knox. The cannons at Trenton. So they had 18 different cannons. They were also called field guns. I'm not great with military weapons. I don't know if anybody can help me out with this. But from what I understand, the field gun was only about 5 to 6 pounds. They were really easy to move. That's just the research that I had. And we had about 18 of them, all ranging between 4 to 6 pounds. Remember, they couldn't be too heavy because they had to fit on boats and go across icy rivers. Like I said before, there was about 40 to 50 boats being used. Those are the boats that crossed the Delaware. That does not account for all the boats that didn't make it across. So, boats lost. There were no record of the number of boats lost. All boats that crossed made it back, which is insane to think about. 2 units, one led by James Ewing and the other led by Colonel John Caldwell, did not make the trip due to icy conditions. Remember, we talked about the 3,000 troops that didn't make it out. Well, one of them was led by Ewing and the other was led by John Caldwell. So those boats didn't cross the Delaware, but it also meant that we didn't lose those boats, which was still a victory, a small victory. Okay, Hessian forces. So, like I mentioned before, we had about 2,400 troops cross the Delaware. The Hessians had about 1,500 troops stationed in Trenton. So we had about 1,000 troops on them, which obviously is an advantage. But they were professional soldiers. They were experienced, they were disciplined, and they were merciless. So their 1,500 was almost equivalent to our 2,500, believe it or not. So obviously the main idea is to cross the Delaware on Christmas night, march south to Trenton. I don't know if this the map, maybe like 15 seconds ago, it showed a perfect description of the map. Washington was coming north on Trenton and marching towards, marching south, starting from the north, and then of course Sullivan was coming through the south. So to kind of pressurize and squeeze them and stop them from getting anywhere. Okay? Washington's forces crossed north, like I said. James Ewing, who never made it out, his job was to block the bridge next to Assunpink, and then John Caldwell was supposed to cross further south to create pressure. So our largest force was pushing north, and our weaker one was pushing south, but we still made it out. Okay. Interesting to mention, obviously we know it was icy, it was cold, it's tough to move stuff across the Delaware. The Army actually fell behind schedule. They reached New Jersey much later than planned. Instead of attacking before dawn, as intended, before dawn, obviously it's dark out, it's way more of a surprise element. They advanced in early morning and struck after daybreak. So it ended up working out, but it was dangerous. We were on a strict time schedule, and it almost didn't work out. Okay, Washington split the forces into 2 main columns, one under Nathaniel Greene and one under John Sullivan. They marched on different roads towards Trenton to cross during the town. Some soldiers marched with bloody feet because they did not have proper shoes and they fell apart with the rain and the snow and the sleet. 2 Americans reportedly froze to death during the march. Okay? The battle itself, we'll talk about what happened in the battle itself. Obviously, it started on the morning of December 26th. They crossed December 25th at night. American troops entered Trenton from different sides. Henry Knox's artillery was positioned efficiently to dominate key streets. Again, the in and out routes, we wanted to pressure them like a pressure cooker. Hessian forces wanted to mount and resist a counterattack, but the American artillery coordinated and prevented the Hessians from escaping and regrouping effectively. Now, Johann Rau, the leader of the Hessians, he was mortally wounded during the fight. That's a huge victory. We killed him during the fight. The battle was short. This is important to mention. The battle, we're talking about a lot of different stuff right now. I'm talking like a mile a minute right now. I know I'm talking fast. But this battle only lasted 45 minutes to an hour. That's how quick we were. And we had to be quick. We had to get in and out. There were only 2 Americans killed in combat. That's the only cited evidence that we have. So we went in there and we smoked. Okay, we only lost 2 men. Matter of fact, Glenn?
I believe we didn't lose any in combat. I thought the only 2 we lost were the ones we lost on the way, but maybe you're...
So I have here, 2 were killed in combat, a few more died from exposure during the march, 2 froze to death, but I think it was total 5 wounded or injured during the march. And James Monroe was one of them that was injured, but I see only 2 cited kills. Okay? Now the Hessian losses, this is what we really want to hear. 22 Hessians were killed, 83 were wounded, which is a decent amount. This is the huge number though. This is what helped us a lot. 896 Hessians were captured. Okay, some escaped southward, but not many made it out. 896. clear and overwhelming American victory, large number of prisoners taken. Okay, and so let's talk about why the Hessians lost. Because America, still a ragtag team of militiamen, and it wasn't super organized yet, and they weren't super happy because they got their butts kicked all year. Obviously, surprise, weather, George Washington's speed. The Americans attacked before defenders could fully organize. Now, this is something to mention. They mentioned it in the video a little bit. It's Christmas night. Okay, Christmas is a celebration. They've been celebrating it for centuries, thousands of years. So a lot of people think that the Hessians were drunk during this time, and there's a little bit of evidence to say that they were drinking, but there's not a whole lot of evidence saying that they were drunk out of their mind and that they couldn't fight. Okay, these were still skilled fighters, and I'm sure that they had been drunk before. So I think a lot of people give it too much credit that they were drunk, but there's a possibility that they were drunk for sure.
Irish?
German.
German beer.
Nolan Brown.
Sit down.
You asked the best question.
What is the connection between the British and the Hessians? How did they get together and all of this?
So say that again, right?
They bought.
Well, yeah, they bought. They were guns for hire. They were mercenaries. They hired them. And the reason that they used the Hessians is because they were like the strongest military in Europe. Or they were the strongest fighters. They weren't necessarily organized military. They were the strongest fighters in Europe.
Yeah, they brought, there was a lot of pressure in Parliament about the number of Brits that were being called over. And considering it was very far away from home, Parliament agreed, or not agreed, they came to a resolution that they wanted a very large external force. So if anything had happened, it would be have less of an impact on, Britain itself. This wasn't the only war they used the Hessians in. There were several before and after.
I know the Hessians, for a fact, the Hessians were in Canada fighting as well with the Native Americans. They were everywhere.
My question is, what would they do with 800 some POWs?
It is amazing. They were able to fit them on the boats. I mean, that was my biggest question. So they obviously were able to capture them and take them wherever they needed to, or at least hold them in place in Trenton. But that's a great question. I don't know the full answer of what they did with them, but it's really demoralizing when you capture them instead of kill them. It's more embarrassing. And we had just went through that embarrassment in Manhattan when they captured 3,000 of ours. So we wanted payback for sure. And to say, sorry, somebody.
Oh, go ahead.
So to say that we captured Hessians was a bigger deal than saying that we captured the English. It was embarrassing for the Hessians and for the English obviously as well.
Jacob, do you think they brought them on the other side of the river where our 2,500 guys who didn't make it across, they will be control of these guys?
It took them a lot longer to do that, especially the ferries that they had with the Marblehead Mariners. But yes, they did bring some of them back, and the 3,000 men dealt with them. I don't know how many died after that, but they definitely had to put them somewhere.
Maybe Rick could do some research on that for next week. Because, it wasn't very long after Trenton. We didn't stay there long.
No.
We took off,
Going
went back south, around up to Princeton.
I'll look
Yes.
into that.
Did we treat the Hessians as slaves when we captured them?
No.
We did.
No.
Basically, they did.
They did?
They marched them through Philadelphia to show that the American troops can't fight, to embarrass them, and then they had them work on farms for food.
No wonder you're tired.
So-
You did all this
So
research.
Lou was telling us that we actually forced the Hessians almost into slavery. We made them indentured servants as farmers. I do believe that we did march them through Philadelphia just for
Could
embarrassment's
have
sake.
used it as a shield.
Yeah,
Well, keep in mind, guys, that the Hessians were thought of in America as just immense human beings. Like it was one of the grievances of the Declaration specifically was talking about the fact that the Hessians were brought in to deal with us. That was a huge propaganda item for us to feed them like that.
Gentlemen, let's remember too that
Whoa! Blew my wig off.
there was a popular outcry in Great Britain about having any British soldiers involved in this for any length of time, especially because of the losses that may be suffered. So the Hessians were brought in mainly because of a huge popular outcry over in England about the possible loss of soldiers. But I remember a couple of years ago, I happened to meet a black gentleman who had a very German name. And I asked him about his lineage and how he came to have such a German name. And he said that he was a descendant from the Hessian soldiers. So apparently a lot of the soldiers, after they were captured, were forced into some type of labor, and they became accustomed to living in the colonies at that point in time. So some of them decided to remain in the colonies after the war, and they established farms and other types of businesses that they settled then in the colonies, and started their families, their homes, and remained here. So
The vast majority of them were held after all their marches and everything, they were held in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And, there's a huge German population there now
Yeah,
still.
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
Uh,
Pennsylvania
The
Dutch, huge.
officers were, the enlisted were quartered and guarded, but the officers were allowed to wander on their oath as long as they stayed within a certain area.
Louis, you want to add something?
Yeah, if you notice now, you can relate this to World War II, when we captured Germany, we brought them here to work on farms, to grow food for us. But basically, it started in the Revolutionary War, carried over.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was definitely not uncommon for us to indenture people and make them work, for sure. Are definitely our enemies. Now, it's important to mention that we just talked about how we won and we took a bunch of Hessian soldiers, but we weren't done fighting yet, okay? This victory was followed by another important American success at the Battle of Princeton. Princeton, again, is in New Jersey still, and that happened on January 3rd, 1777, only 10 days after the Battle of Trenton. So this is called 10 days, what's it called? 10 days of,
10 days to save the revolution.
10 days to save the revolution, exactly, I slipped my mind. Now, politics and psychological efforts. This gave new hope to the Patriots. Once again, a reminder, a lot of these guys weren't going to sign up again come January 1st. But because we had won, it gave them a lot more spirit and rah-rah sort of, yeah, we can do this. It was a huge victory for us, and it got enlistment back on track. This extended the war by preventing Patriot demoralization, and it preserves Washington's army as effective fighting forces, obviously uplifting Washington's legacy.
Considering, real quick on that, so you don't go beyond the whole idea with the commissions and everybody leaving, and I think you mentioned this, but Washington, for one of the first times ever, instead of commanding, was basically begging. And he called everybody together and announced, he offered a $10 bounty. $10 was a hell of a lot of money then. And he offered $10 for just 6 more weeks of service. Just give me 6 more weeks. And while a significant majority of people did so on the spot by show of hands, just as right in the aftermath of the battle.
Yeah, it was necessary as well. It was the Continental Army in certain ways was falling apart the day before Trenton. There was no, the morale was really, really low. Now, like I mentioned before, actually, real quick, I'm going to go through all the different generals real quick, just one more time. John Sullivan, he led another attack, or attacking another column, same thing with Nathaniel Greene, and then obviously George Washington planned and led the crossing. Henry Knox, he was a part of the artillery, he was in charge of the artillery. John Glover, in the Marblehead Mariners, helped ferry troops across Delaware. Johann Rau, who we killed, was a Hessian, the Hessian commander of Trenton, the Trenton garrison. William Howe, okay, he wasn't actually at the Battle of Trenton, but he was the British general overseeing all British efforts, so of course he had to take some responsibility and he had to answer to Parliament. Cornwallis is important to mention as well. He was not at the Battle of Trenton either, but he's going to be crucial in the Battle of Princeton 10 days later. He's really pissed off at George Washington for kicking their ass at Trenton, and he really wants to get him back. So 10 days later, he tries to defeat us again at Princeton. He just couldn't help himself. And he lost that battle too. Loser. Yep.
Now, Jacob, Glenn had mentioned that, Glenn, didn't Washington petition Congress for money, and there was none?
Yes.
Wasn't there civilians who basically financed that re-enlistment, that $10 bounty?
That's a good question, I don't know.
Yeah, Rick is right. The Continental Congress did not. They didn't have any money to send, to be honest with you, but they weren't going to support this losing war. I mean, this was literally the only victory that we had. We had some small victories. But
I'm not sure that $10 was ever paid.
Right.
no, I don't think it was ever paid either. I mean, maybe it was. If somebody wants to look that up.
The Continental Congress couldn't have paid anybody, because we didn't have our own currency. So, to offer them $10 is offering nothing, unless they had a benefactor
That's what I'm saying.
who was
Yeah.
willing to give them money. We had zero money. We
Yeah.
could not print money, we had nothing back.
Yeah, our independence wasn't won yet. We were still at the behest of the English.
Lou, can you do a session on currency like that?
Yeah.
All right, Lou's going to do a session on currency for us.
Lou, you're on fire.
Just real quick, just a reminder, that famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware was by a man named Emmanuel Lutz. It is iconic, but not historically accurate, unfortunately. But it's still an awesome picture to look at. Okay? The battle was a part of the 10 Crucial Days. Those are the words that I was looking for. 10 Crucial Days campaign, which included Trenton and Princeton. Okay? Trenton, the reason that we wanted to take over Trenton was that it was an important crossing point between New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and it's still close to New York City. It was a hub. Okay, obviously you saw the Delaware River. It carries a whole bunch of stuff from Pennsylvania all the way through the Northeast, through the Hudson Valley. And the control of the roads and bridges mattered a lot more even than the river. Okay. Along with prisoners, we also took supplies that were much needed. We took a lot of guns, gunpowder, took anything that we could, because the Hessians had a lot of it, frankly, and we needed it. We were still looking to pretty much play catch up in this war. And like I mentioned before, real quick, just to finish up, Cornwallis tried to make a move on Washington 10 days later, and he lost again. So that was great. Any questions? That's it for me.
Was the British that rich that they could pay all the Hessians? What were they paying? Does anybody know?
That'd be a great Google search, because I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that they were paying a lot of money, and I know that it was worth it to them.
Like, so every time they got killed, they were saving money.
Yeah.
I think they paid him up front, though, right?
Kennedy fire.
A couple things to fill some points here. During the encampment, we covered Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which occurred January of 1776, and was the biggest seller by far in terms of books other than the Bible at the time. He also wrote The American Crisis, and this was These Are the Times That Try Men's Souls. That was used by Washington to sort of get his guys ready to cross the Delaware. He had that read during the encampment. That came out December 10th, I think, somewhere thereabout. It's also important to know that even though we were losing men, Washington really felt that intelligence was important to maintain, and he did so. He relied on a lot of local scouts. They confirmed that the Hessians were unprepared and complacent. The army was kind of crumbling, but the information network was not. One quick story about that I always remember when I think about this and his ability to use spies. We'll cover this when we do a session on his spy network, but there's a fellow by the name of John Honeyman. You should never forget that name. He was very, very crucial in this. He was an Irish immigrant. He was a butcher. He was a butcher, Dave. Look at that. A butcher that matters, right? He secretly worked as a spy for Washington. He posed as a loyalist cattle trader, so he was free to come and go across both sides. They came up with Washington personally, it said, came up with a ruse to have John Honeyman be captured by the Hessians. So he was deliberately allowed himself to be captured, and he was afterwards, or no, I'm sorry, he was captured by the Americans. Americans didn't know he was a spy. They thought he was a loyalist. He was captured by the Americans and brought in a tent before Washington. Washington sent everyone else away, and he had a private meeting with Honeyman, who conveniently escaped. He escaped back to the British side. Said, hey, I was just captured. They had heard about this. They had heard the British, or the Hessians, I should say, had heard that Honeyman was captured by Washington, somehow escaped. They brought him in for intelligence. He reported to Colonel Rawl that Washington's army was weak, was cold, incapable of offensive action. And this reinforced the Hessians' complacency during this time. Days later, we crossed the Delaware. A couple of what ifs. One I just thought of when you were talking about the Hessians putting the troops right over the border. What if they didn't? What if they didn't? What if they stayed up with the rest of the guys up in Princeton? Washington wouldn't have had an outlet to reinvigorate the army. I don't know what we would have done. So that was a mistake, I think, for them to force our hand. He gave us a chance.
Look, it was Christmas. They were celebrating. They weren't thinking about it.
I'm just saying, what if? If they did not put people there, Hessians, I don't know what happens. We lose a majority of our army because there's nothing to inspire them to stay and so forth. Another thing is that weather's often, most of these guys did not have shoes, did not have clothes. They used whatever clothing they had to wrap their feet. And we talk about that as being a barrier to us. Well, in fact, that probably served us very well because it's one of the main reasons that the Hessians didn't think we were going to attack. There's no way how are they gonna get across the Delaware? How are they gonna do this? How are they gonna do that? So that turned into, I think, a very important thing. A password was victory or death. You sit around, smoke cigars, come up with nice sayings. This really meant victory or death. This literally meant victory or death. And this was the password that the soldiers were given for the event. So with that, do you have any questions for Jacob?
First of all, how American is that to cross a semi-frozen river on Christmas Eve in the middle of the night and kill you?
Just importantly, just factually for everybody, it was the night of Christmas that we started. It was the 26th that we actually
Step foot in Detroit.
were in New Jersey. And stepped foot in Trenton.
There was also, just real quick, there was also a lot of backlash after this. I mean, we won, but there's still a lot of loyalists in the area. And they were actually mad that there was bloodshed on Christmas night. Or I guess it was December 26th, but they felt it was a sacred day. Obviously, it is a sacred day to a lot of Christians. And I believe a Presbyterian church was actually affected by it. But it's important to keep in mind that it was a sacred day, and to shed blood on Christmas is a big deal.
Just as you are thinking about this event and thinking about this battle and what happened here, I like thinking about the context of what we're dealing with. We had just lost a quarter of our army at Fort Washington. We're running around, getting chased around. And his whole, the fellow that was here talking last week, he talked about basically our whole goal was to just survive. And that was kind of counterintuitive to Washington's approach. He was a more aggressive kind of fella, especially when he was younger, got him in trouble in the French and Indian War. But that tells you how brilliant he was to be able to pivot and become basically a battle of survival. And then they get there into Pennsylvania, not knowing what's going on. The remaining Continental troops are out loud talking about the day that they can get out of here and go home. And Washington's privately coming up with these ruses about a guy getting arrested, and he's thinking this while this is going on. He's always thinking, "Hey, we're going to have something," and then he said, "Let's go." It was Christmas, and he didn't choose Christmas because it was going to be a surprise. I think he had 6 days before he lost almost the entirety of his army, so he had no real choice.
And I think it's important to mention the speed at which we got to Trenton. We fell behind schedule and we still made it there within 8 hours, within daybreak. Think about it this way. You guys run faster to your car when it's cold outside, right? You get your jacket on, you put your hands in your pockets, and you're like really running to your car when it's cold. That's exactly their mindset when they were crossing the Delaware. We gotta get there fast, we're gonna freeze, we're gonna die. People had their feet frozen, they weren't marching with proper boots like Glenn had just mentioned. And so it was really time, we had to get to Trenton at that time.
Didn't you say that after we took over and eliminated most of the force, we were taking their clothing and their ammo and stuff like that?
Clothing, maybe, I'm not sure. We definitely took their ammo, we took their guns, we took their supplies because we had so little of it for
You
ourselves.
took everything.
Yeah.
I was
You
like
took their
taking the
boots,
shoes.
you took everything.
Awesome.
Tom?
I think one of the things to also think about, we were talking about what do we do with the prisoners. I mean, we took 800-900 Hessians, and they brought them back over the Delaware and kind of scattered them, through Pennsylvania, to your point, Lancaster, and we treated them very humanely, which was not of the norm back then. I mean, we just talked about what happened to our prisoners in New York and how many of them died from the conditions. So what that, one of the things that did, and that was something Washington did strategically. He thought about this, because that then put that seed into the English soldiers when they had to make that decision, and they knew, I believe, that they would be treated humanely if they were captured by the Continental soldiers. It made it a little bit easier for them to make that decision.
Possibly,
So
yeah.
very strategic and an incredible foresight by him to think that far ahead, and that's what I do with these people.
Absolutely, yeah.
To maybe elevate the accomplishment of getting across the river as quickly as they did, when you were talking about the field guns.
Yeah.
3, 6, and 5 pounder
Yep.
is the weight of the shot thing. Like
Gotcha.
the gun itself weighs
Yes.
several hundred to 1,000 pounds.
Sure.
So you're loading this into a boat,
Yeah.
dragging it across the ice.
18 of them had to fit into a wooden boat.
Put it back
Multiple.
together again on the shore because you had to ship it with its carriage disassembled and put it back together and it still got there.
They actually have at Washington's Crossing. We were there, Paulie and I, and a couple other guys, and they actually have some of the boats there, or one of them. I'm sure it's not an actual one, but it's a redone boat, and they were called Durham boats.
Yep.
And they were the only boats that they could use, to get across.
Like a rowboat,
Yeah.
sort of?
Yeah.
A big rowboat, oversized
Flat.
rowboat?
Flat bottom.
There were no engines back then.
If you think about it, making that gentleman's point about using these, most of our army was made up of what? Farmers. Okay, so while they're fighting, we're not growing crops. So we take these guys, now they're growing our food, we can supply our army with our food. Where the British have to bring everything across the sea.
Yep.
Whether the ships make it or not, whether it rots or not, but we're resupplying our army, and those guys are workforce. They're saying, "Frigate, I don't have to fight. I got my own land, I'm farming, here we go."
weirdly enough, we needed the Hessians. I mean, we needed them to work for us. We needed the crops. We needed the effort and everything that they were able to offer, even as slaves or servants. We needed them.
Where were they going to escape to? We had 800 of the troops there. Where were they going? They're not going back to the British to fight for them. So they stayed here and grow crops.
And that's why Pennsylvania became evolved in such a agricultural center, because of these people and their knowledge of farming that helped us out down the road.
Consider we treated them humanely, and especially in light of the fact that British commanders were given write-ups, descriptions of every signer of the Declaration, with basically a target on their back saying, go get them. Go, where do they live? We'll talk next week when we talk, well, we're gonna talk about one of the signers that was up in Princeton who his whole state was attacked. We talked about them basically raping and keeping hostage one of these signers' wives in New York City, specifically because they signed the Declaration. You know, so while this is all going on, we didn't have like vengeance really. You know, we had survival and Washington's foresight to just stay alive. I promise you, I'll bring you to the promised land kind of thing. Even he doubted that they were going to be able to accomplish it.
Put on a good front though.
Vengeance would have thrown us off track. It would have made us unfocused. We had to keep our eyes on the prize. For sure.
Any Canadian references?
Very interesting. I didn't know none of this.
Lee?
I was just gonna add, Glover, you'll see a lot of these characters, whether it's Glover, Knox, etc. These guys started up in Lexington, Concord.
Yes.
That small Marblehead area, those were the amphibious guys for Washington. They actually were at the Battle of Long Island. They were at the Battle of Fells Point. They were at the Battle of Trenton. They were at Yorktown, and you'll see them march all the way down there to Yorktown.
That's how indispensable they were. That's how necessary they were.
They were absolutely key to the story. And it's interesting that Glover's boss, when they started, he was underneath the guy, and they, to hide from the British, they both hid in a cornfield. And his boss froze to death in the cornfield, and Glover lived, so that he became, you know, even more impassioned, and now he's in charge of the amphibious force.
Yeah, we did it all without the internet. We did it all without phones.
Without GPS, without
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of amazing when you think about it.
You speak of amazing, one thing is when they told these, Washington eventually tells the soldiers to march from New York to Yorktown, which is 600 miles. 600-mile march, it is miraculous. It's crazy. A lot of dedication.
In fact, they were able to move thousands of men from Massachusetts or the Northeast Pennsylvania all the way down to Yorktown, North Carolina. It's insane.
And doing it while still 30 to 40% of our country were loyalists. And we still operated in that environment. That looks good. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We have another session next week. And then we're going to take a break for a week or two. And we'll be back on May 11th. Well, next week and then May 11th. All right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake,
No problem.
our young patriot.
Yep.
Carrying the next generation ahead, guys.